千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Let us begin. Now, I would like to extend a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let's get started with 道德经 30. The title of 道德经 30 is Contrary to the Tao. As usual, this shows as 3 Chinese characters that you can see in the slide. The character to the left, the first character, is 不, meaning no, or not, or negation. The middle character is the same character that you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. It is the character for the Tao. Then, the third, the last character to the right, that is simply the character for chapter. So if you were to put the 2 characters together, you may think or perhaps guess that they form together to mean not the Tao, or non-Tao, or no Tao. But this will be a surface level understanding that is not actually what it means. Its actual meaning is contrary to the Tao. So that is the translated title. This term comes from the last 2 lines of this chapter. They talk about things that don't last, contrary to the eternal nature of the Tao. And these will be things like warfare, violence, and aggression. To understand how this concept came about, we will look at the time that when Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching during the Warring Stage period, he lived at a time when there was already more than 2,000 years of history going back even further to antiquity, to the really ancient China. So, from his time, the Warring Stage period, all the way back 2,000 years to prehistoric times, to the time before writing was invented and information had to pass through oral tradition, telling stories. So for Lao Tzu, in his studies of historical chronicles, he could see historical patterns. He could see that there were wise rulers who followed the Tao. And when they followed the Tao, the result was positive. Respect and loyalty in the courts, in governance, closeness and family love in the families. and, of course, peace and prosperity for all. Things were positive because the ruler and the people were all congruent with the Tao. They lived in accordance with the Tao or in alignment with the principles of the Tao. There were also unwise rulers who were quite the opposite. They disregarded the principles of the Tao. The results were negative. The destruction of the kingdom, disasters for the people, contention and conflicts everywhere, misery and suffering for all. They were not congruent, incongruent with the Tao, or contrary to the Tao. That is the historical context behind this title. So let us take a look at the chapter itself to see how Lao Tzu would express this concept. Here is Tao Te Ching 30, containing 17 lines. The one who uses the Tao to advise the ruler does not dominate the world with soldiers. Such methods tend to be returned. The place where the troops camp, thistles and thorns grow. Following the great army, there must be an inauspicious year. A good commander achieves result, then stops, and does not dare to reach for domination. Achieves result, but does not brag. Achieves result, but does not flaunt. Achieves result, but is not arrogant. Achieves result, but only out of necessity. Achieves result, but does not dominate. This is called things become strong and then get old. This is called contrary to the Tao. That which is contrary to the Tao soon ends. Next, we'll look for repeating patterns in the original characters to see how the text is divided into sections. This chapter, unlike many others in the Tao Te Ching, does not present obvious repetitions in the beginning lines. As we scan further down, we get to line 10 and we begin to see a pattern. From line 10 onward, you can tell the first two characters repeat themselves for 5 lines. Let me highlight them in red to make them easier to see. Now, it looks like among these 5 lines, the repetition can be 3 characters per line, except for line 13, which has 5 characters instead of 4. And you can also see the third character in these lines are mostly the same, again except line 13, which has a different character. That character is the same one that you find in the chapter title, the character for no, the character for none, or negation. It is actually a synonymous character with the other characters that do repeat. So the meaning is the same. But then, as I mentioned, line 13 is one character longer than the other ones. Now, despite that, initially it looks like 10 to 14 because of the repetition of the first two characters can be regarded as one section. But it actually is there's a little more to it. First, I want to point out that the beginning character for all 5 lines, that character is 果, which means result. All 5 lines talk about achieving results, which you can see in the translation to the right. But that same character is a little bit earlier in its appearance. It appears in line 8, right in the middle. So let me circle that as well as the character right after it. With that highlighting there by a circle, you can see those two characters are the same ones that reiterate themselves 5 times. Therefore, a reasonable conclusion is that this section actually begins at line 8. Let me mark it so it's easier to see. And beyond line 14, those two characters do not appear anymore. So we can conclude line 14 is the end of this section. Let me mark that accordingly as well. At this juncture, looking at this, it appears to be a chapter with 3 sections. But there's more. If we were to look at the meaning of the lines, as I mentioned, there are no repeating characters. There are no obvious repeating characters in the first section. But judging by the meaning of the lines, we can see the first 3 lines actually go together. They specifically refer to the minister or advisor who serves the ruler. Line 4 to line 7 have a related but different focus. Therefore, there is a dividing line between line 3 and line 4. Let me show that first, and then I'll talk about the different focus, the different meaning. So, from 4 to 7, we see 4 lines divided into 2 pairs, 2 sets of 2 lines each. Line 4 and 6 talk about the conquest and subjugation of the world. Line 5 and line 7 talk about the negative consequences that follow military actions. So, we start out with section 1 about the ruler and the advisor who advises the ruler. Section 2 about the negative consequences of war. Section 3, the longest one, is about the approach or the characteristics of a good commander, military commander. That is the context. Section 4, the conclusion, sums up the Tao principle. That which is contrary to the Tao cannot last. And this gives the chapter its title. So, we'll start the line-by-line analysis, but just looking at the structure of this chapter, we can see overall what Lao Tzu is expressing. He's talking about this aggression, the violence of warfare is something that will soon end. It cannot last because it is contrary to the Tao. So now, let us go to line 1. Line 1 says, the one who uses the Tao to advise the ruler. So in ancient times, this would be a minister to the king or the emperor. The minister in that advisory role can make a huge difference, can have a great deal of influence over the decisions that affect the entire kingdom or empire. It is therefore all the more important for the advisor to follow the Tao in providing advice to the ruler. With the Tao, the minister understands the consequences of warfare. They are not to be taken lightly. Therefore, the minister will steer the ruler toward peace instead of war. The advisor with the Tao should understand it is a fallacy to see the military force as a hammer and all the issues facing the state as nails. Issues like border disputes, trade disagreements with other kingdoms, issues like having to enforce treaties, maintain alliances, handling diplomatic incidents, and so on. Now, all of this are not just for the ruler, but meant for us as the ruler of our lives. So, in the context of our lives, we may not have a person who is the minister dispensing advice to us, but we do have our friends that we can turn to, and we have the inner voice. So if you think of yourself, your mind, that it can be divided into a decision maker, the one who decides the course of your life, and within your mind, there's also the inner voice, which can be different voices for good or ill. If you are lacking in the Tao, that inner voice may be the voice of pettiness, resentment, or malice. If you have the Tao, you will be tuning in to a different voice, the voice of reason or the conscience. That voice, that advice that you provide to yourself will be more likely to be wise and effective. keeping in mind that the consequences of the decisions you make about your life can be far-reaching, just like good or bad advice from the advisor to the king can have a dramatic impact on the kingdom and on history. One single decision, good or bad, can have a cascading effect that will influence multiple areas of life and also have repercussions throughout the days to come. Now, if you turn this around, you can also think about yourself being the advisor to someone else who is the ruler of his or her own life. They may ask you about what to do, how to face a particular life situation, what your advice would be. If you base your suggestions to your friend on the Tao, you can steer them toward harmony. You can keep them on the path, and you can hold them away. You can convince them or encourage them toward a more harmonious existence, not contention. And when doing so, you definitely want to be cautious with any encouragement to engage in confrontations that can escalate and introduce unnecessary discord. If this is advice about a relationship, and perhaps your friend is upset upon being wronged in some way, without the Tao, you might say, send them a text message right now, demand an apology, never back down. That comes from the voice of resentment. But if you hold the Tao in mind, you might provide a different advice to your friend. You may say, look, wait until you are calmer. Speak honestly, but listen first. This would be the voice of reason that can reduce conflict. So I think the principle here that Lao Tzu is trying to convey is pretty clear. Without the Tao, the advice you give to yourself or somebody else can arise from smallness, the ego, anger, retaliation. But with the Tao, it arises instead from alignment, clarity, non-aggression, peace. So moving on now to line 2. Line 2 says, does not dominate the world with soldiers. So the advisor to the king or the emperor with the Tao would be discouraging the ruler away from world domination, conquests, or any attempts that will be seen by other kingdoms as aggression. The teachings of the Tao have always been deeply opposed to violence. It is not pacifism exactly, but it is definitely the principle of peace. So you'll hear about non-contention and harmony quite a bit in the Tao. And I think we all know we can use that more than ever in the world today. And because of that, waging war should be the last resort, never the first option. Waging war only when you have no other choice. Thus, the advisor with the Tao and the wise ruler would maintain strength without flaunting that strength. Offer assistance to neighboring states as a sign of goodwill. Forge diplomatic relationships and alliances whenever possible. So this is the ancient context for the ruler. Let's also be sure to talk about the context of your life, yourself as the ruler. Warfare for an ancient king would mean something similar to a violent streak, threats, intimidation in the context of our modern lives. They would not be the way to go. Now, some may say that you demonstrate weakness by not willing to go to that extreme. In the Tao, the wise cultivator is far from weak, but not aggressive either, has no interest in bullying anyone. So, when you see someone being rude and lashing out at others, what would your inner voice say? If it's the voice of aggression, it will be something like, well, this person obviously needs to learn a lesson, and I'm just the one to give it to him. But the voice of compassion would say something entirely different to the same situation. Like, this person is obviously having a bad day. We should all just give him some space. Let him vent the frustration that is obviously getting to him. So I think you can see the difference between the two voices. Numerous other examples we can see throughout the course of living one's life. For instance, perhaps we observe a partner who communicates rather than to dominate. In a disagreement, one partner may choose not to win through volume or emotional manipulation. They are receptive, listen to the other side, share their own perspective, and look for a resolution that honors both sides. It is possible when we open our mind to the possibility. We may observe teachers who inspire instead of enforce, rather than to rely on punitive rules. This teacher, Tao-centric, Tao-compliant, Tao-congruent, may instead spark curiosity among the students, may encourage that the students take ownership of learning, and have the students build mutual respect. In this way, students engage because they want to engage, not because they fear failing the course. Lastly, as a Dao cultivator, you may observe other cultivators who are more advanced and have already mastered lessons like this. Such a person may refuse to impose beliefs. Such cultivators may share insights when asked. They would not insist that others must agree. But it is their quiet steadiness that attracts those who are ready. They don't have to utter a single word of peer pressure to compel others to listen. Others will gladly listen and tune in because they sense it is the Tao. Next line. Line 3 says, such methods tend to be returned. So this is about the usage of soldiers, using the soldiers to dominate the world, which maps to the violent outlook in living one's life. But let's break down these characters first. The first character I want to draw your attention to is the third character. It is a common character in modern Mandarin. It usually means good. One of the first phrases that people learn, that people know about commonly, is 你好吗? And this character is right in the middle of that. It means good. And it's a greeting that means, how are you? Literally, are you well? Everything good? It's a greeting. But the same character, pronounced differently in traditional Chinese, can have a different meaning. It can mean like, in the sense of habitual behavior. In this ancient usage, it means likely in the sense of tendency. So, in this line, it is basically saying the methods of violence using the military, there's a likelihood or a tendency for that to come right back at you. And indeed, Tao sages have always noted the cyclical nature of worldly interactions, including the negativity of all kinds of violence. Those who attempt to dominate, well, themselves often become the target of domination. Now, in the West, we are no stranger to this concept. We have sayings that basically speak to the same thing. Sometimes we hear people say, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So, when we go back to the context of the ancient ruler, it is clear. A kingdom that attacks other kingdoms will eventually become the target of counterattacks. And it is entirely possible that the targets of its attacks will form an alliance, a coalition, and band together to launch the counterattack. back to the context of personal life. Someone who is excessively aggressive, who tries to dominate others, will tend to create negativity that is likely to return as a karmic consequence. And when it happens, other people around will see the return of that as poetic justice. So you definitely do not want to be the center of that spectacle. And when we cast our gaze externally, we see that there are so many examples of this in the world. For instance, a company that exploits customers or workers may see short-term benefits, profitability rises temporarily, but then its reputation erodes. Perhaps there's going to be backlash, lawsuits, negative press, bad reputation, mass resignation. Eventually, all of those reverse the gains and then some. And we don't need to just see it in the business world. We can also see it in the world overall. We have, for instance, seen environmental disregard rebound as crisis. Industries or governments that exploit and overuse natural resources, ignore ecological balance, eventually will face negative consequences like floods, droughts, fires, or the collapse of its infrastructure. And these are the natural effects of the cause. And the cause is pushing against the harmony of nature. So, in the Tao, everything progresses in cycles, in circular fashion. In these three lines, we see Lao Tzu pointing out the one who uses the Tao will wisely get the ruler away from that circle of violence. What if that's not the case? What if the advisor, ignorant of the Tao or ignoring the Tao, would instead advise the ruler unwisely, initiating the cycle of violence? Here's the illustration. My attempt to put this into a graphical form that can be immediately grasped at one glance. So this works in the Tao because everything in existence follows patterns. Foremost among them is the Great Circle. So we start out with the minister who does not know the Tao providing the wrong advice to the ruler. This is Lao Tzu speaking in that ancient context of his time, the Warring Stage period. So, instead of peace, the advisor advocates for war. Thus, the ruler strays far from the way of peace, away from the Tao. And the ruler, also lacking in wisdom and judgment, makes that decision, wage war. the military force, the army, receives the command to go forth, to dominate and conquer. So from history, we know that this always results in negative consequences, not all of which are expected. The battle is far more costly, lasts far longer than expected, and becomes extremely detrimental to all sides, including the ruler who started the whole thing. What goes around always comes around. The violence that the ruler unleashed comes back to haunt him. There is retaliation, and the ruler is on the receiving end of it. By the time he realizes his mistake in listening to unwise counsel, it is far too late. This completes the circle, and it is not just for ancient rulers, it is also for us. If we listen to bad advice or let anger get the best of us, we may end up getting into contention with people, which is our equivalent of waging personal battle against others. No matter what happens in the conflict, we create a huge amount of negativity just by being contentious. Sooner or later, the destructive energy we project into the world comes back to us. At that point, it is much too late. Our only salvation will be back in the beginning by listening to the Tao, the voice of conscience, instead of the unwise minister, the voice of aggression. So, looking at this, I think it makes perfect sense what Lao Tzu says. And it applies to ancient times as well as modern life. The one who uses the Tao to advise the ruler does not dominate the world with soldiers. Such methods tend to be returned. Line 4. Line 4 says, the place where the troops camp. So to look at this line, I would like to start by taking a closer look at the first character of this line. 师. This character usually means teacher in modern Mandarin. So when we say 老师 in modern Mandarin, that's exactly what it means. 师 can also denote mastery, like 师父. This is master usually in the context of martial arts. A martial arts teacher, the master, would be 师父. It can also be the teacher in some other field of study, such as spirituality. The most commonly known in the West would be the Kung Fu martial arts context. But in the East, the context is much wider. It can also denote profession or expertise, as in 师傅. So when we combine it with a different character, it has a different meaning. But this is commonly used, 师傅, and it sounds exactly the same as the above, the martial arts master, 师傅. And yet, the meaning is quite different. So, when we say 师傅, it is the master you learn from, but then using that different character, it's a person who has a particular skill in trade, like a baker, a plumber, electrician. So nothing to do necessarily with martial arts at all. It can range much wider. So the only way to discern the meaning in spoken speech, because they sound the same, is through the context of the conversation. So back to the context of this line in the Tao Te Ching, line 4. In this context, it is not teacher, it is not a professional, someone with expertise, a different meaning again. 师 means military general. And extrapolating the meaning from a military general, we get to the military force. It means a military force because that is the army that follows the general's flag of command. And that's what it is here, a military force. So now, let's take a look at the entire line. The place where the troops camp. Since we're in the military context, we are talking about the place occupied by the military force. This encampment is where the troops ready themselves for battle. Laozi is using this as a metaphor, reflecting the personal with the military. Specifically, when we talk about the personal, it is the malice in the heart that is willing and ready for contention, like the troops in the camp getting ready for battle. For a person living his or her life, it is that person getting ready to wage a personal battle, to pick a fight with someone else, to go on the offensive in personal conflict. So I can summarize it like this. The ground of the encampment is the heart that harbors hatred. It is depicting a mind that is so full of contentious thoughts, it is like a military camp. Now, when we look around in life, we see numerous examples of this as well. So for instance, someone may be quietly plotting payback. So this person plans how to get back or get even with someone. And it doesn't even matter if the slight was minor. The mind of this person, the heart of contention that this person, the negative feelings, causes the heart to become sort of a strategic command center for retaliation. Or think about what happens when someone is expecting hostility before a conversation. So even before the first words are uttered in that conversation, even before meeting that person, think about someone rehearsing lines to defend oneself or to go on the offensive, lines for verbal counterattacks, assuming the worst. That right there is the camp where the troops are stationed. It is the same in a family. Think about when someone is anticipating some sort of disagreement or conflict in a family interaction, or visiting a relative that the anticipation is that there would be clashes of opinions. So the person who is anticipating all of that is already arming himself or herself, bracing for confrontation, even before anything happens. That right there is the camp where the troops are. So this is a vivid metaphor that we can use in all kinds of different contexts. Next line. It says, thistles and thorns grow. So what it means is that in this military camp, the place where the soldiers are, it is unusable for anything good. Camping grounds can only be used for the troops and by the troops. It cannot be used for farming or any other productive purpose. It's a huge amount of land that is occupied by soldiers. It can only provide for the army. That's it. So that is metaphoric description for what happens when you and I are preoccupied with contention. We're thinking about it all the time. We anticipate conflict, so we're mentally preparing ourselves or bracing ourselves. Because of that, we're not able to do what we should. We're putting on hold anything having to do with making meaningful progress in life. And the reason is because we're thinking or worrying about the upcoming possibility of contention. We're preoccupied with that. We can't do a whole lot in terms of productivity. So that's yet another vivid imagery and metaphor provided by Lao Tzu. There's another meaning associated with that. The meaning has to do with the plans that can hurt soldiers exactly where the soldiers are camped, where the soldiers are staying at. Because of that, the thistles and thorns are metaphors for internal self-damage. So remember, the camp is when you harbor hatred or malice in the heart. Thistles and thorns are growing there. That is the self-damage. It invariably happens to those who hold that negativity within. And we've seen this time and time again in life. Those who are hateful damage themselves before they damage anyone else. And we all know a quote similar to this one. Resentment is taking poison and expecting the other person to die. There are different ways to express this. In a book written by author Bert Gessie in 1980, he wrote, "Resentment is like a poison we carry around inside us with the hope that when we get the chance, we can deposit it where it will harm another who has injured us." The fact is that we carry this poison at extreme risk to ourselves. So, thistles and thorns are how Lao Tzu conveys the exact same meaning. Internal feelings of resentment causing pain to oneself instead of inflicting pain on others. Although the inflicting of pain may be the purpose, it is not the result. So this happens in life when somebody is not able to forgive others, even for something minor. To be fixated on that, it will shape a harsh internal narrative. A narrative like, "This is always happening to me," or "People are always doing this to me," or "Again, I can't take this anymore." It is a narrative that limits trust and joy. The external event may go away, but the internal thorns remain. It can also be when someone carries anger from a broken relationship. So this person is re-experiencing resentment every time a memory from that relationship comes up. It drains energy. It affects current relationships and future relationships. It clouds judgment. The wound is self-inflicted and opened up each time, causing additional pain. Next line, line 6, it says, "Following the great army." So in the ancient context, this would be the aftermath of a battle. So what happens is that there would be burying the dead, grieving for the loss of loved ones. There would be treating the wounded, the injured, and the traumatized. And there would be rebuilding from destruction so life can continue on. All of the above was way too common during the warring stage period in which Lao Tzu lived. So when he wrote that, it was definitely from experience with feelings. And in life, we know in the aftermath of conflict, any conflict, people have to pick up the pieces and continue on after the destruction of a friendship, a relationship, a connection. They have to continue on from the aftermath of the battle. And let's continue talking about that in the modern context. It is telling us that conflicts never end well for anyone. You know, there will always be a period of recovery and regrouping after a fight or argument, just like there is only death and suffering in the wake of the army. There will be lingering resentment on both sides, no matter who was right or wrong. There will be the seeds of future retributions already planted, not a comforting thought. So we see all of the above in all the contentious events of our lives. So what Lao Tzu has given to us is the metaphor. In the aftermath of personal conflicts, you can expect only negativity. There's anger, sadness, regrets. Think about what happens when you see someone burns bridges out of pride. I think we've all heard people say, never burn your bridges, you may need to return one day. And yet, people do frequently. They burn bridges out of all kinds of reasons, but pride seems to be a primary reason. Like, I never want to have anything more to do with that person or that organization ever again. In personal relationships, burning bridges out of pride would be like, perhaps you've won the argument, but you've lost that person forever. In the business world, if you were to burn bridges, later opportunities with that person or that part of the network will also be lost forever. The battlefield where you won, quote unquote, will remain barren for a long time. And it doesn't have to be business world. You can be thinking about at the personal level, words spoken in anger, your conflict with someone else. It may be brief, but the memory of the harsh words spoken will linger. The recipient of those harsh words, whether it is somebody else or yourself, the hurt will be carried for a long time to come. And the person who uttered those words, whether you or someone else, will carry on with regrets and guilt. And we know that this emotional rubble has to be cleared out before any meaningful connection can resume. That is the real world consequence of what happens following the great army of contention, of personal conflicts. Line 7. There must be an inauspicious year. So the bottom line is that the army may be gone, but the damage remains. In the aftermath, everything lies in ruins. it will take time before things get back to normal. Lao Tzu calls it the inauspicious year because from experience, from observation, he knew after the passing of the great army, there would be starvation. Life would be difficult for all the people. Plus, the people would feel afraid. They would fear for their safety because they would never know if the army would one day return. So this is a way to say the negative effects of warfare will last far longer than the war itself. That obviously is pointing out for us about the long-term ramifications of our own personal contention with other people. Just like after an invasion, rebuilding infrastructure can take decades. Just like refugees fleeing the battle will carry trauma with them. The economies of the area will remain unstable for a long time to come. And the mistrust between the warring nations will persist also for a long time to come. For the people left behind, it would be a bad year, not just because of famine or poverty. It's also because of the long psychological and cultural scar that makes progress feel cursed and therefore inauspicious. So let's make sure we address the personal context, living life in the modern world. Contention at the personal level follows the exact same pattern that Lao Tzu has depicted. Everything we do subsequently, here I mean subsequent to the argument or the fight, everything is affected by the extreme negativity we experienced throughout the fight. It is inauspicious for all, for us and the other party. Nothing goes right. Things take a long time to get back to normal. We have all experienced, we have all lived this. Those negative feelings that continue on, affecting everything you do. So it's a disruption or imbalance that doesn't end. The event is over. It has ended. It's got negative residues that persist. They even get into unrelated areas of life. Things that have nothing to do with the other person or the cause of the conflict are permeated with negative feelings as well. That is why everything in life feels inauspicious until harmony can be restored bit by bit. So any kind of contention creates fractures in relationships. Over time, those fractures become cracks and then gaps. We often hear people say, hey, no hard feelings, okay? But that is never true. There will always be hard feelings. Whenever this kind of negative force enters a relationship, pressure, guilt, anger, control, that outcome, when you win the argument, may look like success. But long term, the recoil guarantees failure. In a workplace, if you have seen conflicts occur in a workplace, then you know things become awkward for quite some time to come. People are simply not comfortable working together after the event. Collaboration is negatively impacted. Co-workers, even observers, remain on guard. HR may decide that an intervention is necessary, but based on experience, I can say it is not always effective. And what about other contexts other than business or the workplace? The pattern is the same. In a group of friends that used to be close, if there is a strong disagreement, people take sides, and the group of friendship gets broken up. Perhaps the friends used to hang out all the time, but after that breakup, they refuse to speak with one another. No one can convince them to reach out and mend the broken fences, repair the broken friendship. It happens. Either it has happened to you or you have seen it happen to others. So after all these discussions about the troops, about the encampment, about the thistles and thorns, in the aftermath, we can see how the ancient context maps so well to modern life. I want to use a slide to summarize that. On the left, we have the ancient context described by Lao Tzu. On the right, we have the life that you live that we can draw directly from the metaphor presented by Lao Tzu. So, to summarize the metaphors, we start with the place where the troops camp. Now, because they're getting ready for battle, the army is amassing, getting ready to fight, perhaps training, sharpening their weapons. They are on high alert. The atmosphere, the feeling in the encampment is that conflict is coming right up. It seems inevitable. So for your life, the encampment is the mindset of aggression. The way that I described it before was the heart that harbors hatred. So, just like the soldiers in the camp, you are on alert. You are constantly defensive because you anticipate conflict coming up. You get ready for that personal battle. You see threats everywhere. And just like how it takes a huge area to set up camp for the army, you know thoughts of aggression takes up a lot of mental bandwidth. It squeezes out the room that you would need in that mental bandwidth for other things. The next big metaphor from Lao Tzu, thistles and thorns. As I pointed out, these are self-inflicted injuries. And this is using the metaphor about that piece of land where the troops are. The soil is trampled by soldiers, war horses. Nothing good can take root. So that in itself is a powerful metaphor for us. The thistles and thorns are the internal resentment and malice that actually hurts us. By being defensive, the defensiveness pricks anyone who gets close. You may not mean to, but you end up snapping at other people. Others may wonder, wow, what is going on with you? And it is not easy for your peace of mind, like the land that is trampled by soldiers and war horses. Your mind is trampled by stress. So that's yet another way to see the metaphor at work. Then the next piece of the metaphor, following the great army. So it is easy to see how the army leaves behind misery and suffering in its wake. The resources are drained. And think about how that corresponds with what happens after fighting or arguing in our lives. It is the aftermath of contention. The army of the personal battle has passed on, leaving behind broken fences, broken relationships. Peace of mind lies in tatters, just like resources of the land have been drained. The argument or the fight, even if you won, it leaves you drained emotionally and spiritually. Just like people in the land of the aftermath, worrying about the army returning one day, the aftermath of personal contention is the same. You're not quite sure when the next fight or the next argument is going to flare up. Lastly, the inauspicious year. So in this final part of the metaphor, Lao Tzu points out harvests fail because the land needs time to heal up. The bottom line is that the damage that was caused will outlast long after the battle is done. The battle, in comparison, was relatively brief. What about for us? The inauspicious year for us would map to the lingering effects of negativity. You cannot help but be adversely affected by all of that. We're human after all. We have feelings that will take time to heal. Recovery is slow. suspicion lingers. Others may tell you to move on. But just like for the people in the aftermath, it will be a struggle for them just to get back on their feet. For you emotionally, it's going to take some time for you to get your emotional feet under you again. So this masterful metaphor from Lao Tzu, we can summarize them in this fashion and have the correspondence between ancient times and modern life. As Lao Tzu would say, the place where the troops camp, thistles and thorns grow. Following the great army, there must be an inauspicious year. I think when we lay it out like this, we can see exactly what Lao Tzu wanted to convey. We're getting close to the top of the hour now, so we need to move to the summary for today. Today, we have talked about the Tao perspective on conflicts. In ancient times, it might have been all-out warfare between kingdoms. For us, it's the friction, the personal battles, the contention between ourselves and other people. So the lesson from Lao Tzu begins with the advisor. If the advisor has the Tao, it will be the voice of reason that steers us toward peace and the Tao. Lao Tzu warns in his admonition that methods of using aggression to dominate tend to be returned. Thus, those who use violence will become the target of violence. Then we get to the military encampment. If we harbor malice, the hatred in your heart is indeed where the troops of violence are stationed. That is where they set up camp. As Lao Tzu points out, if we harbor those negativities, we end up damaging ourselves before anyone else. Lastly, we talked about what happens when the battle is over. It's the negative consequences that people don't think about. In our world, it is the same. People focus on the glory of the battle, the winning, but not the aftermath. Lao Tzu says, look, there are no true victors in the aftermath of conflict. Everybody loses in a real sense because the negativity of violence has a long trailing effect. That we have seen is always true. So that is the summary for what we have talked about today. Share the Tao. For easy access to Tao resources, visit my website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and see everything listed, such as Taoism.net, information about the Tao and this meeting, our Facebook community, a place to discuss the Tao with fellow seekers, our YouTube channel recordings of all our previous meetings, my Amazon author page, books and audiobooks for further exploration. You can go directly to this page at dereklin.com/links. When you see the benefits of the Tao in your life, share your experience through comments in Facebook and share these resources with friends who may also benefit. If you find my books or audiobooks helpful, please post your reviews on Amazon to guide others to the Tao. If you have connections to prisoners interested in the Tao, contact me through Derek Lin Books on Facebook, and I will send my books to them free of charge. This is the path that I am on. So I can say sharing the Tao has transformed my life in incredible ways. I would like to invite you to come along. Let us travel together on the path, in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.